So right now we are in completely uncharted territory.
Just going for it. Why not, eh?
Why not? Exactly. If everything breaks, then we just scrap it and start again. What's time?
We've done it before on our own recordings. 3 times for one particular one. That was an entertaining 6.5 hours of my life.
For one episode?
For one episode, yeah. We had a problem with the first time. Something happened, I can't remember what it was. Second time, I think there was either a sound issue or somebody hadn't pressed record and nobody noticed. And then the third time we did, by that point, we had just lost all sense of kind of common sense or anything. We just had fun. We just messed around, and it was actually one of the most fun ones we ever did because we just were being really daft about it. So yeah, that was pretty bad in many ways.
You see, that's what they say in regards to the perils of live TV, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was back then. It was recorded. It wasn't live, so we always knew it would be edited. So 6.5 hours actually probably was not quite. We were probably closer to 7 or 8 because we'd talked for longer then, and one of the lads would just trim it down and kind of cut the fat off it, and then But yeah, I just remember the last take or whatever you want to call it, just being us messing around and having fun and joviality. It was yeah, but one of the best ones because of it, I guess. By that point, we didn't care. We're like, whatever. Let's just. It's just
yeah. By 6 hours in, delirium has already taken hold.
Exactly. As if it doesn't normally anyway, but in that situation, definitely. Just because, well, when we started out, it was just going to be an audio podcast. There was never any intention any of us would be on a camera. I mean, that was horrifying to all of us at the time. But what we found was, I think it was Paul discovered you could obviously kind of record it and just stream it put it on YouTube. So he said, for a laugh, shall we do that? And we actually found we were getting far more views and interest on YouTube than we had through the audio part as just a podcast. So you had to pay to do it as a audio podcast, and YouTube was free. So it just kind of was like, well, it just makes sense. Let's just put it out on YouTube then. We got over our fear.
I was going to say, so that nicely dovetails into the start of our conversation. Welcome, Andy, to Talking Transformers, where I talk about Transformers with somebody who likes Transformers. And I've got Andy from Transformers The Show on, a good friend of mine who has been kind enough to invite me onto their show many, many times. And I thought, well, I'm going to return the favor, but just with the people that I like.
Good. I'll pass that on to the others.
Yeah, and that was the last time David ever appeared on Transformers The Show.
Nah, you'll be back.
I know. I've got a convention to promote at some point.
Exactly.
No
there you go.
It's the one advantage. It's like whenever we're a couple of weeks away from the convention, it's always looking at the phone and waiting for the inevitable. Do you want to pop on? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I'd like to think we do invite you sometimes when it's not the convention, but it's always nice to have you on before the convention, just because everybody gets so hyped. It's always good to have somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to TFN. Come on.
When I was thinking about what to talk about with you on the show, I thought it would be a really good idea to actually talk about Transformers The Show, because the whole genesis really kicked off because you guys just became friends at the convention. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so you kind of go back kind of 2017, 2018 time, and I, along with many other people in the UK Transformers community, was part of a Facebook group called TFUK, Transformers UK. And through that, of course, you get chatting to people, there's posts about Transformers constantly, so you're always making comments, and then you can just get chatting online. And what that led to was the 2019 TFN. I had kind of arranged with a guy called Jamie to kind of meet up with him and speak in person. We chatted online. I'd even sold him a few bots because he just really got into Transformers collecting again as an adult in the last couple of years. And we said, we'll meet up. We're both going to this TFN. We'll meet up. It'll be fun. And so that's what happened. I turned up. And after a couple of hours where I got dragged off to help Toy-Fu, which is always a pleasure, I came back and had a message saying, we're just sat over here in this corner. And there was Jamie, sat with a very tall gentleman by the name of Paul. Got introduced to him. And then the kind of weekend just carried on from that. And, it was such a fun. I mean, it really was just fun. We just hung around with each other for the entire weekend while doing everything you do at TFN, and just had
Hmm.
such a good time. And I was lucky because my wife had come along. She really enjoyed the experience as well. Of kind of, it was the first time she got to come to TFN without kids and just herself, be able to have fun and kind of hang out and socialize. So we had so much fun that we stayed in contact, obviously, afterwards. And we were saying, wouldn't it be great if we could just meet up more often, if TFN was monthly or whatever? And I think it was Paul was the first one to say, well, I've been playing with this idea of doing a podcast on Transformers. Do you guys fancy joining me on it? And it was a bit of a case of, yeah, sure, why not? It could be a bit of fun.
And now you're what? Episode 200 and something something?
200,
So
yeah, 250, 258 now, 259, something like that. I should remember.
once you start getting to a certain number, it just starts becoming ephemeral, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it's I suppose worth pointing out as well, because I know for a fact my wife will watch this, and possibly the partners of the other guys from the show. But I mean, this has been pretty much, with the exception of TFNs, pretty much every Friday for 4 years, going on to 5 years now, that we have kind of been graciously allowed to do this ridiculous thing. So yeah, it's been quite a big commitment from them as well. Just to, although they'd probably tell you they were glad to have us out from under their feet or something, but yeah.
I was going to say it's great that we've gotten to a point in life where we don't have a social life anymore.
Yeah, this I used to actually go out and talk to people, but now it's just doing it online while talking about Transformers, and that's fine. That's fine. It's much more
Yeah.
comfortable and warm, which I prefer.
Well, that's it. Now, you've been gracious enough to have me on, like I say, plenty of times to talk about Transformers, but I don't often get the chance to talk to you about Transformers. So take me back. Like, where did it all start for you?
So Transformers for me started, as a lot of people of my age, in my 40s. But started back in the 80s.
Hmm.
I can remember distinctly, certainly the first Transformer I bought myself, which was Sea Spray. So that would have been what, 85, I think, that was the year of release
Hmm.
for Sea Spray. And I
Mhm.
bought it with my own pocket money, but I had received Transformers before that, and knew of them and everything. And it was that whole thing, child of the 80s. In the UK, you watched Whack-A-Day and saw a few minutes at a time of a G1 episode over the course of a week, as it was drip fed to you. And that
Yes.
that would have certainly been the first thing to kind of get me interested and into Transformers. And then that led me on to the comic book, which I used to have. Oh, I used to have every issue that I kept right up to the age of probably about 19 or 17, maybe. And I remember my mum and dad saying, "What do you want to do with all these old comic books?" And I said, "Oh, just give them to a charity shop or something for somebody else to enjoy." I know. But when you're young and stupid, you don't think to yourself, actually, I'll really want those. So the comics, I mean, I spoke to Simon Furman at one of the conventions, and I said to him at the time, kind of like, your comic books and the writing in the Transformers UK comic book actually made me want to read more, because it was written at, in my opinion, a higher level than a lot of other comic books you'd see around that time. And certainly some of the comic books for children that I've
Hmm.
seen, nowadays. So that really got the hook to me for Transformers. It opened up the universe of Transformers to something much wider than just the cartoon. And then, as I say, the Ladybird books as well came from that generation where you got the little book catalogues at school. And my mum always knew that it was always going to be the same for me. Every time I got that book catalogue, I'd scour it for, right, is there a Transformers book? There is. That one, please. And that would be what I'd buy.
So obviously in the 80s there's a giant explosion. There's G.I. Joe that would become Action Force, there's He-Man, there's Transformers, there's Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
there's Thundercats. Were you like all in on Transformers, or were you dotting around different franchises?
Transformers was always the kind of the main one. It was always the one I came
Mm.
back to, and it's the one that I was lucky enough that my parents knew that it must have meant something to me because they chose to keep my original Transformers toys for me long after I'd lost interest in them. So I always knew Transformers was kind of my main one. But back then, the 80s was such an incredibly fertile time for different toy franchises and cartoons and everything that you had. So I always dabbled in a little bit of the others. So, like you said, Thundercats, which I always really enjoyed that. I always thought it was. I still maintain that it's the theme tune to Thundercats is one of the best cartoon theme tunes there's ever been. It's just it grabs you from the start and it's fantastic.
No question. Yeah.
And then that carried on. You know, there were so many different cartoons and toy lines that were around. I really enjoyed Visionaries, and I actually thought, you know, oh, this is going to be fantastic. I wonder how many years of toys we'll get with it. And then, of course, it was gone almost as soon as it arrived. But that was another one that I was really interested in. I know the Mapes brothers are big fans of it as well. I know they've done even a panel at TFN about it. And
Yes.
then slightly later on, the other one that Ghostbusters, the real Ghostbusters, loved that. I used to run around with a friend of mine on the estate, and we used to pretend to be Ghostbusters. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which did come a little bit later on, in kind of like towards the end of my time in primary school. But that was such a huge explosion for that toy line as well, and the cartoon obviously that came with it. Although I always loved the movie, and I still do. The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles live action film is still, in my opinion, one of the best comic book type films that they've ever done. But I might be
no question about it. I 100% agree with you. I think the first live action movie is so, I mean, for a kids movie, it's so dark.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's quite. There is some gravitas to some of the scenes in it, and you know, really emotional scenes. The forest scene, which I won't spoil for anyone who might not have seen it, but there's a forest scene where the turtles are just thinking about and trying to kind of concentrate and thinking about Splinter, and it still sticks in my mind. I can still remember kind of watching it and being moved when, you know. And for a film like that, you don't think you really got, you know, it's a popcorn film. You think you're just going to go and, but yeah, so that franchise as well, Turtles, was definitely a big part of kind of my childhood up to a point. And then I got old.
As we all did, yeah. I feel like for me, it was He-Man to Power Rangers. That was kind of my era, you know, so everything in between.
How could I forget He-Man as well? Yeah, Masters of the Universe, which, you know, He-Man was another epic kind of cartoon and toy line. But I feel like that for me, it was in its decline when I started to get into Masters of the Universe. And if you know that franchise and the history of it, it reached that point where characters were released that had nothing to do with the cartoons and things. And you weren't getting the He-Mans and the Skeletors that should be in the waves necessarily. But yeah, I've revisited Master of the Universe, as I think we've discussed on the Transformers the show before, and as an adult, and the modern versions of Master of the Universe, which I think are really, really good as well. But yes, Power Rangers though, see, I never really linked with Power Rangers. I don't know why. It just didn't grab me.
It was the last great big explosion before like I got out of watching kids stuff, but it is the one that when you go back and revisit it as an adult, it is the most difficult one to penetrate because you're very conscious of the low budget, the poor special effects, the fact that this is a cobbled together show from a show in Japan. And so it was one of those ones where I was kind of very much of the opinion I liked it as a kid, I've now grown up, and it's stupid.
Yeah, I think that's
And then
probably true, yeah.
oh yeah, and then a couple of years later, or a couple of years ago, I started reading the Boom comic book series.
Right.
And it's amazing. like it really is, because what the comic is allowed to do is to cut away all of the problems that you have with the concept of Power Rangers because of the way it was produced. And it just allows you to be able to tell these really gripping stories about 5 teenagers fighting a space witch.
Yeah. Well,
So, yeah.
you get that with the comic books. I think the comic books do, in my opinion, give you more scope to kind of not so much expand on the story, I suppose, but give it more depth and give the characters more depth that maybe sometimes the TV shows, particularly of the 80s and the way that kind of kids' TV programs tended to be, they were one-shot episodes and it was all about selling whatever toy it was. Whereas the comic books tend
Mm.
to have, serialized stories that continued and you just get more depth to the characters. So I've always been more a comic book guy than necessarily a
Yeah.
cartoon or a show guy. But I can get. I mean, there's
Mm.
no doubting the popularity of Power Rangers and how huge it is. And as you say, maybe if I gave those Boom Comics versions a read, it might actually appeal to me a bit more.
I would highly recommend them. They're incredibly enjoyable. But that is for Talking Power Rangers, which is a podcast that I will never do. But this is Talking Transformers, so I want to loop back around. You mentioned obviously there about being a child of the 80s, going from one thing to another. But what is it about Transformers, do you think, that allows it to stick with you after all these years?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I've pondered this myself. I think the novelty of the toy line has always been a real pull for people. At the end of the day, you were
Mm.
getting a vehicle, and especially with the early Transformers, the 84, the 85, a realistic looking vehicle that transforms into this robot that's fighting in an intergalactic kind of war and is here on Earth trying to protect us or trying to destroy us. And I can't really. I can't really. I mean, to me, that just saying that makes me go, "Yep," and that's what I would want to watch. I would have always been a
Mm.
science fiction fan. I used to sit with my dad and watch old science fiction movies and things that he had watched many years ago, and they'd be repeated on TV, and sit and watch those kind of things with him. The old Star Trek series, the original Star Trek series, and then obviously the next generation that followed on afterwards. So I've always been into science fiction, and there was just something about those robots that I really loved. And then with the Transformers line, I still feel like as good as those early years were, and there were the toys, fantastic. I thought when it kind of went more science fictiony and the alternate modes of the Transformers became more like science fiction vehicles and things, I found that really, really, just really grabbed me, really cool. So that's why for me, kind of 86 onwards was kind of like when I was peak into Transformers. That was when I just loved the designs and some of the characters, even though they didn't necessarily get that depth of development through the cartoons that others did.
That's so fascinating because it's very rare to find a season 3 fan. And not
Yeah,
to say that you're not a fan of season 1 and 2, but the more futuristic designs a lot of people do check out. I
yeah,
think especially for people who were born maybe 1 or 2 years before us.
yeah. Well, I think that's the thing. I think there's almost sometimes it's almost like a little bit of snobbery about, well, no, the best designs are always the 84, 85 original design, and they're excellent. I mean, you can't deny these are fantastic toys, and a lot of them still stand up now. You give them to kids now and they still love playing with those things. But
Hmm.
as good as they are, I kind of just always loved, because I wasn't a cartoon guy. Now I grew up, and as I said, my access to Transformers, the cartoon, was mostly through Wackaday, and you'd see a bit of it, and that was probably only season one, really. I've had this discussion with
Yeah, never
friends.
got out of season 1.
Exactly. Now, some of my friends did have the very early versions of kind of Sky TV, so they had access to be able to watch my understanding season two and season three. But I didn't go around their houses to watch that. It'd be on at times when it just wouldn't be feasible for me to do that. So I never really saw season two, season three until I was older. I didn't even have them on video. The first Transformers video that I ever bought was the Rebirth, which of course is the unofficial kind of, well, it's the season four is what they call it, but we know it's kind of then
Hmm.
get the new toys in that you're going to sell for that year and then just tie it off. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the idea of them going to Nebulos. I loved the headmasters and the target masters, the new characters. And yes, of course, you grow up and you can realize, well, it is like so many of these things, just a big toy advert. But I still think it's really well done. I still think it's really entertaining and it goes along at a really good pace. And for the characters that they wanted to push, I still think there's enough character development in there that I cared about them, and that kind
Hmm.
of just carried on from there. It was just, I guess, it's what you you grow up with. If I'd grown up with season 1 and season 2 all the way through, I'd probably be an 84, 85 guy. I just would. The nostalgia element of it.
Yeah. And I guess given the fact that you were big into Marvel UK, I mean, the season 3 characters, as they're affectionately known, they very quickly make their presence felt in the comic. I mean, as early as what, it's about issue 80 something, 86, isn't it? Target
Yeah,
2006.
yeah, yeah.
And then you've still got the best part of 250 issues left,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
predominantly taken up with
Sorry, go on.
post season 2 characters, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong. In the comic book, there of course was the recycling of characters because there would be the toys that would need to be sold. But I'd still go back to the fact there were those longer stories like Target 2006, like Time Wars, like Legacy of Unicron, and that whole period that then fed into the Headmasters series that they did, and then kind of how the UK Marvel Comics took the Headmasters and Target Masters and used them, and they're just all very, very iconic things in my mind. Like the annuals, I can't believe I forgot to mention the annuals while I was talking about reading. But
Mm,
the annuals, like every Christmas, I got the Transformers annual, and most of the time that was the only one I wanted. It was like, is there Transformers annual? That's the one I'd like, please. Ask Santa, and I'll have that. And I can literally close my eyes and see that front cover of what must have been the 87 year when it was, I think, Scorponok on the front. It was either 87 or 88, and Scorponok kind of
yeah.
crouched down. And that was one of the toys. That was the main toy I got that Christmas. Was Scorponok, and just blew me away. Just the three modes, the size of it, everything. So yeah, those later ones, they're just the ones that appeal to me the most. Not for everyone, but
Mm.
yeah, definitely for me.
That original Generation 1 Scorponok toy is in my Mount Rushmore of Generation 1 toys. It
Yeah.
is
Oh, definitely.
so good.
It's again that thing that you could give that toy to kids nowadays, and they would still have fun with it. And yes,
Hmm.
obviously by modern standards, it's fairly simplistic, but is that really a bad thing when you're a little kid and you just want to transform your Transformers nice and quick, get them into the different modes to continue whatever the story is that you're acting out in your head? I don't think so. So yeah, that's and it's up there. I'm a big fan of Power Master Optimus Prime, the original toy, and yes, it is a giant brick. I could put that through a window without a shadow of a doubt. But it's still just such an iconic toy with so much presence, and it does have playability
Mm.
with the smaller Prime and the fact it has the base mode. It's just those toys were just a massive part of kind of that element of my childhood. And I always knew if it was raining outside and I couldn't go and play football, or go riding on my bike with my mates like I would do when the weather was good, I'd be inside, I'd be playing with my Transformers, and those Transformers would always be a massive part of whatever the storyline was that I was imagining with them.
Did you find that when you were growing up in the 80s, you become a fan of Transformers, and quite clearly that is your thing. I found, and I don't know if you feel this is the same way with you, that when inevitably the next thing would come along and your friends would then gravitate towards that, you were constantly trying to fight them and be like, no, come back to
Yeah,
Transformers. Don't.
yeah, definitely.
Did you
Yeah.
ever experience that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I had a friend, a very good friend of mine, Mark, and he lived literally just around the corner from me. Um, and I used to go around to his house, and he was very lucky in that he had an uncle who lived in America who seemingly was quite well off and wealthy, and would kind of bring over or send over just lots of toys that maybe we didn't even get here in the UK. So he had Transformers that you
Mm.
wouldn't normally have over here in the UK at that time, but also other toy lines. He would always like be playing with the other toys, and I'd be going off and just playing. They're still sat together in the room, but I'd be playing with the Transformers, and we'd find a way to integrate all the toys together. But the Transformers had to be involved. That was the thing. There always had to be some element of the Transformers there. So yeah, definitely, it was just one of those things where I just had that massive link to it, and always came
Mm.
back to it. Um, yeah, just a great toy line. That's the thing. I mean, we wouldn't be here sitting talking about it if it wasn't.
Well, we wouldn't be. And that's where I feel like the universe has vindicated my passion for it, because if I ever see, old friends that, would drift off and play with something else, I'd be like, Transformers is still around though, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's He-Man? you
Yeah.
know.
Where's your Thundercats
Um
now?
well, that's it. That's it.
Yeah,
How
definitely.
many times are we going to try and reboot these things?
Yeah. Well, again, you look at Transformers and its longevity. At the end of the day, has any certainly Boys Toyland had that longevity where it's rebooted successfully so many times, and it's.
Hmm.
I know people might say GI Joe, obviously Action Forces it was over here, but I don't think that's had the continued constant level of success that Transformers has had moving forward. I can't think of too many other things that have.
No, I think the only other one that you can point to and say every time it's been rebooted, it's been a success, would probably be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes, yes, that would probably. But we've got a few years on them, so I feel we're ahead still. But yeah, they
Well,
do the same thing.
yeah. Yes, exactly. They're nothing but spring chickens, man. They've never been in this game as long as we have.
Definitely not.
So when it comes to Transformers now, what's your focus then as a collector? Because we can see a vast lineup of everything from Armada to current to G1 behind you. What grabs you nowadays?
Well, I kind of when I got back into collecting, it was all the kind of mainline stuff, early 2000s. There was some of the reissues that were going on, the G1 reissues, so I kind of picked up some of those. Um, so my focus really started to become those kind of generations toys that were the reimaginings of the original characters and toys that we'd had back in the 80s, because that was what I remembered and that's kind of what I wanted to get into. Now, I think that's changed somewhat because I'm now, I'm, through all of this, through kind of becoming part of the fandom and the TF Wiki and going to TFN and meeting and talking to other fans, you kind of get the door open to other elements of the Transformers that you maybe had no idea about. So, like Beast Wars completely passed me by. It's obviously hugely
Hmm.
popular. Um, and there are now Beast Wars toys within my own collection, despite my own joking about Beast Wars, you know, Trucknut Monkey and all that. But despite all that, I have Beast Wars toys that I really like and that I have as part of my collection. And then the Unicron trilogy was another big one. So when I met my now wife, uh, my stepson, as he became, was of an age where he wasn't into Transformers, but I got him into Transformers, and the toy lines that were around at the time were the Unicron trilogy ones, and he
Hmm.
ended up going fully in on these things. He absolutely loved them. So I used to buy them for him, but not really for myself. But then you'd mess around with them and you'd appreciate, oh, this is actually quite good. Roll on years later, he wanted to get rid of all his Transformers to fund whatever the next thing was that I think it was Star Wars that he'd gotten into. So fair enough, they're your toys. But I've actually ended up kind of recollecting those toys again because I really liked them, and it kind of got me into then watching, Transformers Armada, watching for my sins Energon, watching Transformers Cybertron, and kind of finding out more about these characters and these toys. So uh, that's kind of where I am at the moment. It's about broadening kind of what I'm into, but also
Hmm.
buying the things I want. I will very much admit, and I'm Dave. I don't know if you were the same way back in the day, but in my early years as an adult collector, it was buy everything. It was whatever's released, I'll have one of all of them. Thank you very much. And
Hmm.
it's only kind of as I kind of got older and your priorities change, family, and everything else that you have going on, space being a big issue as well, mostly space if I'm being honest. I started to think to myself, well, why am I buying all of them? I don't have these toys. I'm not that interested in the character, or the toy, whisper it quietly, maybe isn't the best. So I've become more selective in what I buy now. So if there's something I really want, fine, I'll pick it up. But I would no longer do the whole thing of a wave of Transformers becomes available and I pre-order every single one, unless, of course, it was all characters I wanted.
Hmm. The notion of buying everything is one that I would totally agree. I was 100% there, especially when I got back into it around the same time as you. You know, Transformers Armada, RID was just dwindling, and that was it. It was like, buy everything. I want all of this. And it took me a good few years to realize that even though I've bought all of this and I have amassed a giant collection, it is buying a lot of the time for buying's sake. There's no real attachment to it. I would always say that when it comes to Transformers, the thing that grips me is the story and the characters. I am very much a toy secondary kind of guy. I think part of the reason that Blockies has become something that I truly love is that as I'm getting older, I start to realize, actually, you know what? The notion of sitting there and messing around with a transforming toy isn't giving me the same enthusiasm as it maybe once did. So realizing quickly that, oh, I say quickly, it took several years, realizing that you don't need to buy anything and that you can buy things that actually are going to bring you joy, whether it be because of a certain character or whether it because of a certain play pattern. I find it's just so much more rewarding nowadays.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. I think some people are very much about the transformation, and I think quite a few of my friends who are third-party collectors, that's almost the
Mm,
priority for them. Um, that puzzle element of Transformers has always appealed. Let's be honest, can you work out how to transform them? Um,
mm,
and the original toys were very simple, relatively speaking, and you could transform them fairly quickly. Uh, People now maybe want things that are more complex, but I don't necessarily want to sit there, even with the toy of a character that I might really love. I don't want to have to sit for 30 minutes transforming it to get it from one mode to another. A lot of the
mm.
time with kind of kids and other things, and you just don't have time for it. So, yeah, I think the transformation, I still enjoy a fun transformation. I still like a clever transformation. I like to figure out and find out, how it works and everything. But it's less of a priority to me now. And as you say, things like blockies, which, I mean, they felt like they came out of nowhere. Apparently, they didn't, and they'd been on sale for a while. But they're just such good fun. And I also think as I've got older as a toy collector rather than just a Transformers collector as well, that I've started to appreciate actual action figures more rather than right. Well, it
Mm.
must be a Transformer. It's got to be a Transformer, otherwise it's just not. You don't get. There are some fantastic action figures out there that you can get. They don't transform, but they're so posable and they resemble whatever character it is so well. Blockies are just really fun, really posable, and really surprising. So many people who you speak to who are kind of getting into them or bought some of them. Sorry, it's starting to sound like an advert for Blockies, but it's true that so many people who were like, "Oh, well, I'm not really interested. That's not really my kind of thing," and then they build one and they have a fiddle around with it, like, "Wow, this is." I've actually
Mm.
seen and heard people doing this in front of me. Going, "I know, right? Yeah, they're really cool." Um, I think we all enjoy that fun element of any toy, don't we? That's the thing.
I think your point sort of hits home a little bit there. Maybe not something that I'd possibly considered before, which is the reason, or one of the reasons that Transformers always stuck out with me is because, and you mentioned it earlier on, certain Transformers toys are bricks.
Without
They
doubt.
just are. But an awful lot of, especially the season one, season two characters, because of the nature of their transformation, it allowed the robot mode to actually come with a level of articulation that you wouldn't normally find in a traditional 80s action figure. He Man had really, with the best will in the world, 3 points of articulation. Because, yes, the legs did move, but they sprang back to where they were
Yeah.
supposed to be. So you had shoulders and you had heads. And that 3 to 5 points of articulation pretty much dominated toys up until the 90s. So Transformers, in a sense, had a much better articulation count for some figures, definitely, than other ones. And so to your point, I agree with you. I've become more appreciative in the last few years of action figures and have actually bought more non-transforming action figures than I think I ever have it before.
Yeah, it's definitely true for me. I think again, a bit like the '80s was such a kind of rich time for toys and cartoons and being able to kind of get into those toy lines. Now, the nostalgia means that we have lots of modern versions of those same toys and toy lines. Not always for
Mm.
everyone, obviously. Stylistically, it might not necessarily be the look that you want for them, but there tends to be such a wide range of choice from your higher end, more expensive ones to the ones that you can eat. I mean, I didn't think 10 years ago that I could walk into a Smith store and there would be Masters of the Universe figures, on the shelves. Turtles, as you say, are always around. But I mean,
Mm.
there's so much variety. I mean, the Turtles figures now, you can go from the NECA, really realistic and extremely posable figures, or just get a, 15, £20 one from a toy shop, and that the kids can play with and enjoy. It's quite a lucky time for us all, really.
It baffles me how many toy companies have got a Turtles license.
Yeah.
it seems like if you're a startup toy company, you're just immediately handed the Turtles license, and it's just there you go, off you go.
Yeah, and there's just it's a good thing for us because we get that choice. I know there's the new Joy Toy versions of Turtles that are out there,
Mm.
and some of those look fantastic as well. But they're a different scale to everything else that seems to have come before. So, it's great that you get that choice. And with Transformers, we're getting more of that choice. I think a lot of the kit building stuff has become really really come to the forefront, popular. But even that, there seems to be
Mm.
so many companies now doing the kits of Transformers. It's yeah. I wonder how long that will be sustainable before eventually we move on to whatever the next thing is.
I was going to say you've got to assume that there's going to be casualties here because yes, they are filling different niches. YOLO Part very much different to Blockies, which is very
Yeah,
different to Flame Toys. But at the end of the day, there's only so much money to go around in a particular market. And I would imagine that despite the popularity that we have certainly seen both in person and online for Blockies, the that is still a subset of a subset.
yeah,
It is a fan of Transformers that doesn't mind the fact that it doesn't transform, that immediately rules out an awful lot of people,
it does. Yeah,
that it isn't made by Hasbro, that then, and so it will be interesting to see how long this bubble can sustain itself. I mean, Blockies, I think, have a real advantage, which is that because of the way their system is set up, it means that they're able to turn out a new wave of Galaxy, which is really their main wave, I would suggest, every quarter.
yeah,
So every 3 months, you're getting 9 brand new characters. Well, I say 9 new characters. You're getting 7 new characters and a repaint of Optimus Prime and Megatron.
yeah. Usually, yeah, that is the way. Yeah, but
You
then
know,
I mean, I hope they do stick around for a while because they may be our best opportunity to get certain characters that we don't get often in some
mm,
form through these waves. Everybody I speak to who is into Blockies now and has had that little taste of it, the big debate is always, oh, well, will we get the 86 movie ones next? Will we get the 87 Headmasters and Target Masters? Will we get the Power Masters? Where could this go? And I hope they're around long enough that we do manage to get into all of those things. But they're definitely really good.
the the fact that we're 5 waves in, and when I say five, 5 generation 1, because wave 5 was exclusively a
Yeah,
Transformers 1 set. So we're 5 waves in, and really the only hint that we've had of season 3 is Ultra Magnus. So I kind of feel like if Blockies are going to be dropping a quote unquote season 3 or 2005 set, it would most likely be like one box. Here's
yeah,
Galvatron, here's Cyclonus, Scourge. Because even though there was an awful lot of season 3 characters, unlike series 1 and 2, there is very much a defined specific cast. Springer, Cup, Hot Rodimus, RC, Ultra Magnus. That's kind of it. Wreck-Gar, I guess, and Blur.
yeah,
But so you could sort of do that almost in one case, really.
yeah. I was thinking the same thing, really, because as you say, it is that core cast that so many of them have become legacy characters now that we do get throughout different iterations of Transformers. And yeah, I'd
Hmm.
definitely be there for it. I suppose you wouldn't need necessarily do Ultra Magnus again, or you could make Ultra Magnus a chase figure, something, do something maybe with the colours and give him the Diaclone style colours, and stick that in there. But it'll be interesting to see. It really will be fascinating to see what what they can really do with this and how long this they can keep this success going.
Yeah, because one, you've got a pretty tight release schedule, once every 3 months. And what's great about it is that unlike Hasbro, nothing seems to ever leak.
No, that's true. We never
You
seem
know,
to see these
that
things early, do we?
no, so you get something like that. I mean, when you think about it, we're five series in plus two of the Shining, if you want to include them. And already, we've got a pretty substantial cast lineup now. It's pretty good if this is the way that you want to collect Transformers.
Yeah.
Um, how are you feeling about the main line at the minute? Because it feels like we're in a situation now with current toys where it's iterative as opposed to reinventing the wheel. We're getting a new set of combiners, whereas 10 years ago we had a new set of combiners. How are you feeling about that at the minute?
Um, yeah, it's a funny thing. I don't know if it's part of the reason why I've started kind of looking into and exploring third party a bit more now, because I find that last year, 2024, we had so many fantastic toys and Transformers toys that came out, but I also felt there was a lot of kind of white noise amongst it as well. Um,
Hmm.
and there'll be different reasons and factors behind that, financial and whatever. But a lot of well, we'll just repaint this toy and we will put it out there and say it's this character. And sometimes that works well and it's fine, and other times, yeah, not so much. I found myself now looking at these combiners, and I will pick them up. I will certainly pick up the aerial bots because I think the combined version of Superion looks fantastic. I think having had Menasor and the Stunticons, that's I remember saying to some of my friends, to me that's the best version of a combiner, excluding third party ones, I suppose, that I've ever handled. It just solid, posable, looks good. Um, and I think that's fine. My only concern with the combiner element of it is how, if they're going to use this framework style, where the frame of the combiner form is an extra part in Motormaster's case. The trailer, obviously, Silverbolt gets I'm not sure what you'd call it, but something that just bolts onto the
A
back of the jet, a
box.
thing, yeah.
Yeah.
If we're going to do that, my only concern is then how will that work for some of the other combiner teams where that wouldn't necessarily be immediately obvious, where you would have
Hmm.
that there. If you've got the Seacons, for example, well, what would that be then? You can give Snaptrap a
A
gigantic shell.
giant. I was going to say a giant clamshell.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
that's
just
it.
opens up.
Yeah, it'd be like a hermit crab, just this huge thing on his back. But I actually think that a lot of the toys that we've seen from this Age of the Primes wave, I am more interested in and excited about because of some of the kind of original molds that we've got. I think that's the thing at the moment
Hmm.
is we have had toys that have been released that just this last year, for example, that have been molds from 3, 4, 5 years ago. And they're reusing. Don't get me wrong; they were good molds at the time, but I don't know if I want necessarily that again, as opposed to a new mold. But as I say, economic
Hmm.
factors maybe. It might be the reason why with mainline why that's happening, and third party is definitely kind of doing. They do some great stuff anyway, but some of the stuff that they've done recently with Unicron trilogy figures and some of the kind of late kind of 87, 88 bots has been really cool to see. So yeah,
Hmm.
mainline. Everybody says that I'm some mainline defender, and you always stick up for Hasbro and mainline. I'm not. If I don't think it's good enough, then I'll say I don't think that's good enough. But I just kind of I'm hopeful that the Age of the Prime stuff is going to be good. I'm really interested to see what happens with that. Although I realise some people don't like the whole idea of the primes and the 13 and everything. But I just think we could get some great toys out of it. That's the thing.
Who would dare to
I
criticize
don't know.
the primes?
I couldn't think, Dave. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere.
Yeah. I think a good point that you bring up there is that there has been some really weird choices regarding repaints of characters, especially to bring out characters that feel a bit left in the wilderness when it comes to the current mainline. Because, yes, I fully understand that the purpose of the main line is that it is a catch-all. It is going to explore the entire history of the Transformers, and it will allow them to be able to make toys that wouldn't fit within a contemporary line. And that works, I guess, especially when you have something like Transformers Armada, where you're going to create the core characters. Next year we're going to get Red Alert, and that will be the trio: Optimus Prime, Hotshot, and Red Alert. Those are really your three animated mainstays when it comes to the Autobots. But there's other decisions that they make, like, say, for example, Strong Arm is an interesting one. That's a third use of that mold. We had Minerva, we had Elita 1. They then give us Strong Arm, and it's such a weird one, because while I appreciate that Strong Arm was the standout character of that RID show, we've got nobody else. So if you're a fan of Transformers RID 2017, was it? Like, your
2015,
one link,
yeah.
20, jeez, that show is 10 years old.
Yeah. Mad.
That's terrifying. But if you're a fan of that, you have one link to that show in the main line. And so it almost makes you wonder, is it worth doing it then at all?
Yeah, it's a funny one as well, because Strong Arm, the original toy that came out, I think it was called Warrior Class back then, it was a much loved toy, and the character was much loved. It's good to see a kind of a strong female character who kind of didn't go with the archetypal female bot. She was just really entertaining, and like I said, probably one of the breakout character, I think, from that series. But then why only do that? I suppose there's Filch, which we got as one of the Star Raiders, who featured in that same cartoon. But then that hasn't really, I wouldn't say necessarily completely resembles the Filch from the cartoon. Yes, it has the general look, I suppose. But it's a strange choice, and we see it with some of the others. We've had quite a lot of the Armada bots now. We've had some of the Cybertron bots, which I was really pleased about, because I'm a big fan of Cybertron Starscream and Vector Prime, and we got those. I wonder now if it is Hasbro looking at things and saying we can't always just put out the G1 toys. Again, we have a market now for people who are of an age where they remember these other toy lines. We need to gradually slip some of these in. So we'll see how they go.
And I hope that is the case. Like, let us do that. Let us depart from G1. Not entirely, you don't have to, but I think given the 40-year history of the Transformers, it's about time that some other people got some love. Because, Beast Wars has had it, with the exception of a few characters. The entire main TV cast is out there. But, and I do often wonder whether or not the reason that we've never had the Transmetals is just because of the cost that it would be to make the VAC plastic.
Yeah.
But can we do that? Can we give people RID figures? Is there even a market there, however? Is there enough RID 2015 fans to support more figures? Because the reason that I own a Strong Arm is because it was £5. And at £5, I'll take a punt on anything, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
it'd be interesting to see. I do wonder whether we would be better almost, and I know some of my friends, particularly those of a G1 persuasion, who would shout me down immediately for this, but I look at when we have had kind of the reinvigorating of the franchise, and we have things like Beast Wars was obviously a massive change in in terms of the aesthetics of the toys and everything, but it was very successful. Unicron Trilogy, I think, was pretty successful for what it did. I don't think we should be afraid of having not a completely new, we don't have to throw out Optimus Prime and Megatron as main characters and things, but why can't we have designs for them that aren't traditional and a cartoon series maybe to go with it, or whatever they go with at the moment? I mean, I think Hasbro seems to be more inclined to lean towards computer games, particularly mobile games at the moment, but it would be interesting to see if they could maybe reinvigorate the franchise again a little bit with something new. So it's the characters you love, but here's these new versions of them, just like they did, or have done previously. And yeah, maybe they might find they actually catch that hook with the kids again, because I think that's the big thing. Is I do wonder how their sales are with the kids. With us adults, as adult collectors, I'm sure we're lapping it up, but yeah, it'd be nice to see the kids getting into it again as well.
It would. And I think what you were telling me earlier on was actually quite impressive. The idea that, with your stepson, you tried to get him into Transformers at just the right age and ultimately ended up falling back in love with the franchise as well. I that's a story I've not heard before. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because it just goes to show that Transformers is a multi-generational property now. And so it's good to be able to serve that. And I think perhaps, and I don't know whether or not you've spoken to your son about this since, but the idea that, you had your Transformers, but he had his Transformers. And those were different. He wasn't playing with his dad's Transformers. He had his own. And I think that's a big deal, because how many kids want to, play with this thing that my parents played with?
Yeah.
Something to consider.
Antiques. Yeah, and I'd like to think he certainly still takes an interest in Transformers and things like that. He became very much a Star Wars and Marvel fan in his teens, and DC as well. So that became his next kind of I don't want to say obsession, but what he really got into, and is still into. But he still knows Transformers. He's still interested in them. We actually always joked about having him come on to our show and sit in on an episode to give his perspective as a younger person. But I don't think he'd be as keen on that going on camera.
Dad, I'm not hanging out with you and your mates.
Yeah, it's a bit like if I want to go to the pub with him, he'd be fine with that. But you're sitting in there and talking on a podcast might not be something you jump towards doing now. But
yeah, I just like the idea that he's like, Dad, it's a Friday night, I've got better things to be doing.
Yeah, he almost certainly does as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, Andy, we're coming to the end of our hour, but I always like to spend a little bit of time right at the end of these shows to chat with people about other things that they're fans of. It was interesting, you mentioned earlier on about just being a big fan of comic books. Are you reading any comic books at the minute outside of your typical Transformers books, or?
Do you know, I'm not to my sins at the moment. I kind of want to get into some of the comic book lines that I've seen some of my friends kind of reading and enjoying recently. I know that they've redone the Thundercats comics, restarted those, and I've heard good things about those. I need to catch up on the Skybound Transformers comics, which have been, really well received by the people I know, and it seems well received by the community in general. I was an IDW guy, so I'm not going to lie. It kind of, when that all started to come to an end, it almost felt like a real ending of an era for me. It was kind of like, oh well, I'm sure what comes next won't be as good as this. I kind of almost went back to that. It's not my Transformers, but everything I've seen and heard about the Skybound stuff is really good. So I kind of that would be my focus if I was collecting and getting comics again.
Well, my advice would be buy the Skybound stuff. That new Thundercat series.
That good, eh?
It's interesting. It is. Unfortunately, I think the problem with the Thundercats comic, the new one at least, is that the voice just isn't there for it. The tone isn't there. It's written very medieval. Almost, I wouldn't quite say Shakespearean, but there's a lot of arts and thous and things like that, and it just doesn't feel Thundercats to me.
Yeah. Well, it's like
You know,
the Visionaries one that they did with the crossover with Transformers and Visionaries, which I was so excited
mm,
for. And then you get it, and it's its own thing. So I try not to
mm,
judge it too harshly, but as if you're trying to appeal to the fans of the original Visionaries toys and cartoon series and comic books, as short-lived as
mm.
they may have been, but they were there. Then it was a massive departure from that, and while I still kind of enjoyed it for what it was, it didn't feel like the Visionaries that I thought it was going to be. But then again, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like it's our perception of all these things whenever there's something that comes up and it's a new version of something you really loved and enjoyed, we all look at it through that lens of, but is it my version of that thing? And sometimes we need to be a bit more open to these things, I suppose.
Well, that's it. I would agree 100%. I think being a slave to history and tradition can be a detriment to your ability to tell good stories. However, I think, especially with something like Thundercats and with Visionaries, and I would almost apply what I mentioned earlier about the success of the Boom Power Ranger series. That doesn't reinvent the wheel. It is still at its core exactly what you would expect. It's the same five Power Rangers, it's the same good guys, it's the same bad guys. But where I think it works is that it it leans into its core concept further than the TV show was ever allowed to do. With Thundercats and with Visionaries, I feel like the the original versions that were so successful of their time have kind of been left dormant. There hasn't been massive revamps of Visionaries. And when you've seen revamps of the Thundercats, it's been a very different take. And so I think there's a chance that people can go back to the original version of it, lean into it now, and give people what they want while being able to tell something new. Because the in fairness, the original Thundercats show had 150 episodes or something like that, but there's still plenty of stuff I think to be mined in that universe. So I think sometimes you have to find that balance, don't you, of am I going to reinvent this for a new generation and come up with a new take because there's nothing to be mined from the original, or should I go back to it because actually I can go back to it with a different approach and be able to get compelling stories out of it?
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I think kind of when they do go back and they're able to do that to kind of go back to the original stories and kind of find more and something else to make it interesting and to have that hook, I think it certainly appeals more to the kind of adult collectors such as ourselves, and gets us hooked
Mm,
in. And I think we are with those kind of comic books, we are the target audience there. I suppose it's knowing that target audience, whether you're trying to hook in the new, younger readers who maybe aren't familiar with whether it be Thundercats, Visionaries, whatever, or whether you're thinking, well, our core audience here are, say, 35, 45-year-olds who will remember
oh,
with fondness, the original cartoon and they want to kind of see a bit of that. I think we saw that with the Masters of the Universe reboot, Revelation and Revolution,
mm,
which
mm.
I think was a Revelation got mixed. I think we'll say reviews. I personally really enjoyed it for what it was, but a lot of people were disappointed that a Master of the Universe cartoon was not more about He-Man and Skeletor necessarily than it felt like it should have been, and Revolution was more what people were expecting, and that was much better received. So it's possible to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, listen, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on and having a chat with you. It's nice to do it when it's, chilled out and quiet here on a nice Wednesday afternoon. But before we go and before we say goodbye, just like to give you the opportunity just to tell people where to find the show and where to find you online.
Hawk my wares, thank you. Yes, so Transformers the Show is where you will normally find me. We are a live Transformers themed, well, we'll call it a YouTube show, every Friday night at 8 p.m. on YouTube. If you search for Transformers the Show, you'll find us there, and definitely recommend coming along, watching the live show, getting involved with the live chat. We have a lot of people who come in there, and they almost have their own little community now through doing that. And then we are also on Facebook, Transformers the Show on Facebook as well. As I mentioned before, you will also see me sometimes posting and involved in the TF UK Facebook group. And we have a very active Twitter and Instagram, which is TF Show UK, or again, just search Transformers the Show. And my colleague Jamie, who does a lot of work on our Twitter account, he's always posting the latest news and offering opinions and things like that. And so that's really good as well. So yes, that's where you can find us, and hopefully enjoy some of the content there as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, listen, thanks very much for coming on. Say goodbye, Andy.
Goodbye, Andy.
And we will see you all next time on another episode of Talking Transformers. Bye.